focus for today is called the bubbly liquid. And the problem is, why does B bubble but A not bubble? And you're going to try to gather enough data to support an answer to this, which we'll call a conclusion. Now I want to explain this focus. I have two sets of equipment here that are identical except for one factor that's called the manipulated variable. Everything else is exactly the same. In any properly designed experiment, you have a control group, which is in this case is A, and an experimental group, which is in this case is B. And there's always only one difference between them. Now, does anybody remember why you only want one difference between the control group and the experimental group? Anybody remember what's wrong with having more than one manipulated variable? Does anybody remember why you want only one manipulated variable? See, there's only one difference between these two setups. What would happen if you had two manipulated variables? Can anybody figure that out? Wyatt?
Two?
Yes, but what's wrong with that as far as the scientific method is concerned, Emily?
That would be
Jeremy?
Then since there's two, you don't know which thing is making it to the whatever.
Okay. The reason you experiment is to try to find out what the effect of the manipulated variable is. If you have two manipulated variables, you don't know what's causing the result. Okay? Now, I better tell you what the result is. This bottle has a tube with bubbles coming from it. And there aren't any bubbles coming from this tube. Now, I want you to raise your hand the next time you see a bubble, and then I'm going to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. About every 6 seconds there's a bubble. There aren't any bubbles coming from this one, or not more than 1 or 2 during the whole period. So the problem that we need to solve is why there's 3 bubbles but A not bubble. And I'm going to tell you what the parts of these two sets of equipment are, the control group and the experimental group. So you can ask questions that include the names of these parts if you want to. Okay, there's a bottle A, a bottle B, a jar A, a jar B, a bottle liquid A, a bottle liquid B, a jar liquid A, a jar liquid B, a stopper A, a stopper B, a tube A, and a tube B. So there are a lot of things to ask questions about, but keep this in mind. Between the control group and the experimental group, there's only one manipulated variable. There's only one thing that's different. Everything else is the same. So we can't come up with a conclusion that's good until we can include the manipulated variable in it. All right, so we're going to gather data. Remember, you don't write the data, I do. So who can ask me a question that I can answer yes or no that might help to answer this problem? Emily H.
Does liquid A contain only water?
Are you talking about bottle liquid A or jar liquid A?
Jar liquid A.
Jar liquid. She's talking about this liquid. Does jar, I'm going to put JL for jar liquid, A, contain only water? We don't know if there's any water. Yes. All right. Who knows the control question for number 1? Control, Jake.
Does jar liquid B contain only water?
Does jar liquid B contain only water? It's important to know this. It doesn't do any good to know this unless you know this. Yes. These are both only water. Is the jar liquid the manipulated variable?
No.
How can you tell it's not the manipulated variable? Because it's the same. Okay, so you may feel like you're not making any progress, but actually you've learned something you didn't know a few minutes ago. Okay, who wants to ask another question that might help to identify the manipulated variable? Brandon?
Does bottle liquid A contain only water?
Does bottle liquid, I'm gonna start a little simpler than that, Brandon. Does bottled liquid A contain any water? He's talking about this liquid right here. Yes. Now, his question was actually, does bottled liquid A contain only water? I'm gonna have you look at that and vote. Look at this liquid. Raise your hand if you think that's only water. Raise your hand if you think there's something besides water in there. What tells you that there's not only water, Janelle?
The color.
It's not clear. Okay, good. Now, what's the control question for 3? Control question for 3. Hallie.
Does bottled liquid B contain any water?
Bottled liquid B. Oh, I'm sorry. What is it you said? Does bottled liquid?
B contains only water.
Are you talking about this one? Bottled liquid B. No, that's not the control question for
Contain
3.
any water.
Any water. Okay. Yes. All right. Now, what's the next question about B? Next question about B, Darby.
Does bottled liquid B contain only water?
Good. That word only you're going to use a lot this year. Does bottled liquid B contain only water? Raise your hand if you think this contains only water. Right, you can tell me the color. No. And I forgot to write the answer here, no. Is water the manipulated variable?
No.
Why isn't water the manipulated variable? Tanner?
They both have water.
The same. Okay, we're looking at we can't write a conclusion yet because the conclusion has to be about things that are different. Okay, well, we're making progress, even though you may not feel like it. We know a lot more about the experiments than we did before. Okay, 7. A doesn't contain only water. So what should we find out next about A? What's something we should find out, Jessica?
Does it contain anything else?
All right. We know it contains something else, so let's find out what that something else is. Does, I'm not going to put D off the bottle liquid because we know we're talking about the bottle liquid now. Does A contain any blank? Yes. All right, here's some clues. Listen to the clues. Don't suggest anything until you can narrow it down to one substance. It's a solid. It's granular. It's found in the kitchen. Well, we've narrowed it down to about a dozen. How many do we have to narrow it down to before you suggest any? All right, you've narrowed it down to about a dozen. A granular solid found in the kitchen. It's yellow. Now, who knows something that fits? Anything that fits. What, Emily?
Cooking oil?
Cooking oil is not a solid. Okay. Brandon?
A lemon?
Lemon's not a liquid. Or lemon's a solid, but it's not granular. Okay. Wyatt? It's gotta be a granular solid that's yellow.
Vinegar?
Vinegar's a liquid. Janelle?
Crisco?
Crisco is not granular.
Yeah.
Maybe nobody knows anything. Emily Butcher?
I'm not sure, but cornstarch?
I think you're thinking of cornmeal, aren't you?
Cornmeal, yeah.
Cornmeal. Cornmeal fits, but it's not cornmeal. Okay, I don't think you'll ever guess, so I'm going to give you another clue. Okay, a yellow granular solid found in the kitchen. It's used in baking bread, but not in baking cakes. What's used in baking bread, but not cakes? Stevie, you know anything? Yeah, but that's not a granular solid. It's got to be a granular solid that's used in baking bread but not cake. What do you think?
It's
Where's your name tag? Shayla? Okay. No. Jeremy? Yeast. Now, some of you may have never heard of yeast.
It makes bread with
Yeast. Raise your hand if you've ever heard the name yeast. All right. Well, I'm going to show you some yeast because some of you may have never seen it before. It comes in little packets like this in the baking aisle. By the sugar and the flour. What a lot of people don't know is that the yeast in these packets is alive. It's alive, but it's dormant. Now, that word dormant comes from the Latin word dormire, which means to sleep. And anytime you see an English word with D-O-R-M in it, it almost always has something to do with sleeping. For example, if you go away to college, the place where you sleep is the dormitory. They shorten it to say dorm. Okay. Well, you might see these as sleeping, but that's not necessarily true because I'm not sure yeast can sleep, but they're not active. Now, something else that's dormant, some people say Mount Rainier is a dormant volcano. Hibernating bear is dormant. The trees out here that lose their leaves in winter are dormant. These yeasts are dormant, but they're alive. The way you make these active is by putting them in water, and they become active. Well, these packets are foil. They're aluminum foil to be waterproof. The store doesn't want any water to get in these packets because if it did, these yeasts would become active right in the store, and they would die from a lack of food. And the store doesn't want to sell dead yeast because nobody would want to buy it. Okay, now some of you have probably never even seen yeast. So I'm going to pour some yeast out of this packet onto Chase's name tag. I hope you can see it. It's little yellow granules. See those little yellow granules coming out of that packet? Each one of those granules probably contains several hundred yeasts. Yeasts are very tiny. You can only see them with a microscope. And if you look at them in water with a microscope, they look just like little clear bubbles. But if you watch one for a while, it develops a little bulge on one side, and the bulge gets bigger and bigger, and pretty soon it's as big as the original yeast, and then they divide. That's how they reproduce. Very simple. They're not much more complicated than a bacteria. What, Brandon?
Could you show us how it looks like in the...
No, we don't have the necessary equipment for that. But I am pretty sure when you get to high school biology, you'll be looking at yeast in the microscope. Emily?
I was wondering, you know how it says that if it was active in the store, it would die of lack of food? What does it feed on?
Well, we're going to get to that. We're going to get to that. Good question. All right. So, A contains yeast. Now, who knows the control question for 7? Control. Nathan.
Does B contain any?
Does B contain any yeast? Yes. Is yeast the manipulated variable? No. Okay. 9. Now, I don't want anybody to say this word. I want to call on somebody. Does A contain blank, 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 blank yeast and water? Now, raise your hand if you know from previous sessions what 4-letter word fits. Justin? Only. It's important to find that out. Yeah. Okay, who knows the control question for 9? Control, somebody I haven't called on yet. Janelle?
Does B contain only yeast and water?
No. Have we found a difference?
Yeah.
All right, now we can't write very much in the conclusion because that's not very specific, but here's what we can write. Because bottle, liquid, A and B are different. We can say that because one is only water and yeast, but the other one isn't only water and yeast. All right, so now we're on the track of the manipulated variable. That's supported by the data, so we can call it valid, which comes from the Latin word for true, and reliable. And it's not refuted by any of the data that we have so far. Does anybody remember from a previous session what the word refuted means? If you refute a statement, what do you do to it?
Prove it's not true.
You prove it's not true. Those data don't prove that this is not true. So it's valid and reliable. But it's not good, because a good conclusion would tell you how to set it up. All right. Who can figure out something we ought to find out next? We know that A is only yeast and water, but B isn't only yeast and water. What's something we ought to find out next? Jackie.
You could find out what sugar other things.
Okay. Does B contain any blank? Yes. All right, here's some clues. It's a solid. It's granular. It's found in the kitchen. It's white. What fit? Name something, anything that fits, Jeremy.
Salt.
Salt fits. What else fits, Harley?
Sugar.
Sugar. Okay, salt and sugar fit. Here's one more clue. You ought to be able to narrow it down to one with this clue. It's sweet. What is it? What is it, Tanner?
Sugar.
Sugar. Okay, we have to ask one more question about B. Does B contain blank, 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 sugar, yeast, and water? Who knows what word goes in the blanks? Is there somebody I haven't called on yet? I think I've called on just about everybody. Chase. Only. Yes. All right, in one word, who can tell me the manipulated variable in this experiment? One word, Jackie.
Sugar.
Sugar's the manipulated variable. Okay, now I can add to the conclusion because we have data that indicate a difference. All right, that's still valid, but now we're going to make it more specific, which means